classical philosophers. I think the Indic attitude to philosophy is actually probably very much like that of classical Greece. And that is that you take a philosophy, and Sophia in classical Greece was very much something which involved praxis as much as what we could say the dox side of things, the orthodoxy. So for an Indian philosopher, the intellect and the mind is very important. And in fact, the mental aerobics that are performed by some of the early Indian philosophers are quite breathtaking. If you ever read Madhyamaka, some Nagarjuna and some of the early classical philosophers. But their intention is stated to be different. The stated intention of most Indian philosophies from the classical period is to bring about moksha, release from suffering. So there are some systems of thought where, and I cite the Abhidhammas, where the actual process of thinking and mentation about ontology and soteriology is actually itself a salvific pursuit and integrated to a personal practice. And I think this is something which would have been self-evident probably to Plato and Socrates. I think they would probably have felt the same way. I think I am not a philosopher in the Western traditions, but when I have spoken to students who are studying philosophy, they tell me that occasionally you'll find something in a philosopher like Kant, for instance, who said that he did his work for the glory of God, that he actually wanted his philosophy to be a way of allowing him to engage with God in a new way. Now, in the Indic traditions, there isn't that same theistic emphasis always. There are in some of the Hindu traditions. But certainly in Buddhist philosophy, the idea that philosophy is a process whereby your mind becomes liberated through the pursuit of that philosophy is really the central tenet of much of the early thinkers, and particularly Nagarjuna, say, in Madhyamaka, and particularly what we call the Abhidhamma, the higher teaching, which you find in Pali and Sanskrit. What they want to do is they want to find a way of thinking that will help them to attain liberation. So in a way, philosophy for them is a kind of meditation in the sense of a praxis that you can actually do to achieve awakening. Now, many of those thinkers, and I suspect probably most at that time, though they don't necessarily say so, would be undertaking their own personal practice at the same time as they were discussing and debating philosophical points. And this would be taken for granted to be a central element of their pursuit. And if we go back to the Buddha, and I'll talk about the Buddha, he was clearly trained and understood a lot of Brahminic philosophical thinking, and he debated with the greatest thinkers of his time. And in fact, the suttas, the early suttas, are wonderful to read from this point of view, because you just get a picture of early India being a little bit where people would just approach teachers they found interesting and spend time with them, learn meditation from them, and also understand their theory systems in new ways with a particular teacher, and used to get itinerant teachers. The atmosphere feels a little bit like, I mentioned Plato before, but it actually feels a little bit like a Socratic dialogue, where you get people discussing and debating things as part of a larger field of activity. Now, the Buddha, the life story of the Buddha is that he left the palace and tried various practices with various teachers, but he found they did not lead to peace. So there is a very crucial passage in the Mahasachaka Sutta, that's M36, where he says he starts to practice these self-mortifications, and he realized it doesn't work. that self-mortification does not actually bring wisdom, which is interesting because I think a lot of us think that suffering inevitably brings wisdom, but he found that it didn't. And there's a very interesting passage, which oddly enough, the rest is often quoted, but not this bit, where he says, why am I frightened of the happiness that is freed from sense desire? He realized that there was an incredible happiness to be found in meditation. And he asked himself, why am I frightened of it? Could that be the way to awakening? And he realized, yes, it could. So that prompts him to sit under the Bodhi tree, attain these meditative jhanas, and then find awakening. So what's crucial here from the point of view of Western philosophy, it was that it was actually praxis that was the governing feature of his philosophy and of his new understanding of the world. And he stopped rejecting a particular state of mind, which he'd been very nervous of, and decided to cultivate it and saw, yes, this is a very happy and balanced way of experiencing the mind. I'll try and pursue enlightenment through that. So throughout his meditation systems, we find this emphasis on finding what he called samadhi, calm, and what he also called panya, or wisdom, and vipassana, insight. And this is also very much associated with mindfulness too, that calm and mindfulness can and should go together. And that wisdom, the wisdom that is found through such a unification, will lead to liberation. So I'll just say a little bit about the states beforehand. I think I'm very interested in Roma's research on what's taught at schools, because what's sometimes taught at schools, if people have done a little module on meditation, is that jhanas are calm and insight is separate. And this is the standard Buddhist textbook way of approaching meditation. But neither the texts themselves nor the practitioners within those systems find that to be the case, because if you do attain a state of calm, you inevitably find insight and wisdom, because it just happens naturally. If you've been in a really bad mood and you do a meditation and you feel a bit better, there is inevitably some wisdom arising from that insight. And people find that, as they do if they pursue the jhanas. And conversely, if you have wisdom that lacks calm, it will not be true wisdom in the Buddhist sense. In the Abhidhamma, wisdom in this momentary analysis, if wisdom arises without either loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, or equanimity, it's actually not wisdom. So when I have a great wisdom about my neighbor who is annoying me, and I think, oh, well, he's obviously not a very nice person. I think I can see right into him, you know, he's obviously got some severe emotional problem. If I think that with irritation or hatred, it is not wisdom in the Buddhist sense. And that's quite an interesting thing to think about, that we quite often think wisdom can almost do without kindness or a sense of balance or a sense of the whole. But within the early Buddhist Abhidhamma, it can't. Wisdom can't arise without having some sort of emotional purification found from, or emotional stability found in meditation. So I will do a practice with you and see how you get on. This particular practice is one that I learned years ago. And it was very interesting because I learnt it, and actually from somebody who was an academic, L.S. Cousins. And I just found it wonderful. And, you know, after a while, I didn't at first, I have to say, so don't worry if you don't find it wonderful. I couldn't concentrate at all. And I just found it just really addressed so many things that had been secretly troubling me about the mind. It seemed to show a whole area of exploration for the mind, which was positive and which introduced health into my mind and balance, and actually happiness, because I wasn't a terribly happy sort of young person. And this was all linked to the wisdom, and they weren't separate. I didn't sort of think, oh, now I'm happy and now I'm wise. It was like a kind of change that came that included them all. And the interesting thing is, I tried immediately, of course, being a bit of a bookie type, to find books about my meditation, and I couldn't. So I asked Lance, my teacher, where I could read about this, and he said, oh, you won't find books on it. It's just practiced all throughout Thailand. It's a local practice. It's a traditional practice. People don't write about it. So that was very interesting, because now it is not practiced throughout Thailand, because there has been a great fashion for different meditation systems. So although it still is practiced, it's rather like an endangered species or a flower that you want to keep going. There are a number of reasons for that, and we can perhaps discuss them afterwards. It was associated with the old Thailand, and there was a great wish to become very Western and improve things in Thailand. I'm saying improve in inverted commas, and to make things very scientific, and a great emphasis on the Vipassana movements and on analysis. Now, those elements were always there in Buddhism, but not in the rural monasteries, Northeast Thailand, and where meditation was usually taught. Now, Kate Crosby, I think, couldn't come this evening, has done wonderful research on this system, and has found texts that have shown it to be the oldest kind of meditation in the region. And it was absolutely everywhere. She's found manuscripts from all over Thailand and Cambodia, in particular, some from Burma and Laos, and even Sri Lanka as well. All these traditions, all these regions loved this meditation, but when the West came, they felt they ought to try and be a bit more Western, and so the meditations were adapted. So you're now doing, what we're going to do now is really the old-fashioned kind of Southeast Asian meditation system. I've certainly been very happy with it for years and years and years, and I was very lucky in my teacher, Lance. It has a lot of stages, so we won't do all of them. If you come, we'll do a few, and if you come across a stage you don't like, don't worry, just watch the breath and wait till we get to the next one, and then we'll finish. So are there any questions people would like to ask now? Okay. Well, what I suggest you do is find a comfortable posture. Now, ideally, it should be half lotus, but it can be cross-legged. And I don't know if you've ever seen a Buddha with the Samadhi posture, and I'll just show my hands. It's like they're like that on your lap. So the thumbs are touching and resting on the fingers. It's quite different from some practices in the Eastern schools in that regard. So you put the right hand on the left and just gently rest the thumbs on the first fingers. And then shut the eyes. If you can do a cross-legged or a half lotus, that's very good. Or you can tuck your legs to one side, which a lot of people do in Thailand, or just sit on a chair if you really can't do any of those. And now take the longest breath that you can comfortably manage. So it may help just sort of find your breath for a few breaths, let it do whatever it wants. And just try and enjoy it as it goes. in and out of the body. And then let it go to the longest breath that you can comfortably take. So it often helps to slightly expand the chest on the in-breath, and that will allow you to take a longer breath and open the diaphragm a bit. And make sure that it's comfortable and that you can keep it going. And then just see if you can be aware of the breath at that level, the longest breath you can comfortably take. And when you're ready, just count from 1 to 9 on the in-breath. Actually, just do the counting in your mind on the in-breath, and from 9 back to 1 again on the out-breath. And you can imagine the numbers in your body if you like. Some people like to see them, or you can hear them, or just count internally. And use the language which is your first language. So if it's not English, count from 1 to 9 in your childhood language. And then on the out breath, count from 9 back to 1 again. And if it feels strained, keep the breath that you were doing and just speed up the numbers or slow them down so that eventually they fit the breath. And we'll just do that for 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll give the next stage. And this is called the longest of counting. So it's from 1 to 9 on the in-breath, and from 9 back to 1 again on the out-breath. And while you're doing it, just try and keep general mindfulness of the whole body. Just be aware of your whole body sitting on the cushion, and the breath coming into the whole body. And there's no need to strain. If you feel strain, try and see where you're straining from and try and make it more relaxed and lighter. And if you feel anything tensing up, just see if you can relax it a bit and be aware of the breath as it goes through the whole body. So keep awareness of your contact with the ground throughout and the feeling of the practice. See if you can get a good feeling of the breath. Now change to a breath to the count of 6. So you've already set your numbers. So now do something that's called a longer breath. And this is to the count of 6. And count from 1 to 6 at this breath. And from 6 back to 1 again. And again, keep your native language, your first language. And also keep awareness of the whole breath in the whole body. Keep awareness of the whole body. And this is called the longer counting. And now, go to a breath to the count of 3. And you can perhaps feel it around coming to the throat area. So it's what's called a shorter breath. So you count from 1 to 3 on the in-breath, and from 3 back to 1 again on the out-breath. But you can still be aware of the feeling of the breath in the whole body. It's the feeling of the breath pervading the whole body. So this is the shorter counting. So it's 3 on the in-breath, and then 3 back to 1 again on the out-breath. And it's very light and fine. Keep the effort light. You don't need to grab your breath. Just very light, shorter breath. And try and keep awareness of the whole body as you do it. And now you've got a feeling for that shorter breath. Just drop the numbers and just follow that breath through to the throat. So you keep awareness of the whole body. Just follow the feeling of the breath and feel it coming into the body. And if it goes below the throat, that's fine too. Just keep it at that shorter length. And keep awareness of the whole body. And see if you can enjoy it and make it finer. It's might not need such a heavy intention or attention. Just explore it and see if you can enjoy it. And now go to that longer breath and just follow that. So this is the longer of following. Go back to that, but without any numbers. Just follow the breath at that longer length. And you may find one length suits you more than another, and that's fine. That's quite common. And just follow the breath as it goes to the longer level, and follow it as it leaves the body. And keep awareness of the whole body all the time. And now go back to the longest breath you can comfortably take. And again, just follow it. No numbers, just follow it and enjoy it as it comes in and out of the whole body. And this is the longest of following. And return to that very first exercise, the longest of counting. So come back to the numbers right at the end. And return to normal breathing and finish the practice. And keeping your eyes shut, you might want to move your legs around, sit in a more comfortable posture. Keep your eyes shut. And we'll now do something called Metta, which you usually do for a couple of minutes at the end of the meditation, and sometimes before. So just breathe in loving kindness to yourself on the in-breath. And if you can't find loving kindness anywhere, don't worry. Just imagine it's somewhere in the universe there, and you're breathing it in on the in-breath, and it's pervading the whole body. And take whatever breath length you like, whatever feels comfortable. And then on the out-breath, breathe this loving kindness to all beings. So if it helps, say, may I be well and happy in the in-breath, and may all be well and happy in the out-breath. And imagine the loving kindness going right through the body, right down to the ground, just pervading the body. And then you're breathing it out again to all beings. May I be well and happy. May all be well. And if it's easier, you can just say on the in-breath, Metta, and on the out-breath, Ta, inside the mind. And see if you can get comfortable with that. And just get a feeling of the unification, the whole body being filled with loving kindness. And then that you're breathing it out. And if you don't feel it at all, it doesn't matter. Just breathe in good air and let that come in through the whole body and breathe it out again. And finish the meditation. And make sure you've gone back to your normal breath. And that you're aware of your body. That you're aware of things in front and behind, and to your left and your right. Just be aware that you are where you are. Always the best place to be. Now, are there any questions anybody would like to ask about that practice at all? Anything at all, whether technical or anything?
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. I have a technical question. So I wanted to ask about the numbers and the kind of bringing on the numbers and taking them out, and what role that plays in the meditation. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and I think there's a question in the chat, but I'll come to that. Guinevere asked one. Yes. Yeah. It's a breathing mindfulness samadhi practice, concentration practice. But I'll come back to that. The numbers arouse samadhi. They help to bring the mind in focus. And in fact, you get a variation on that technique in a very early commentary of somebody called Buddhist describes something like this. It's not quite the same. But the numbers are the means of bringing the mind. So you find, of course, I didn't mention all the hindrances and distractions that kind of walk across, like, probably see my dog walking across there, but they kind of walk across the mind all the time. Don't worry, you just bring your attention back, and that arouses stillness. But the awareness of the breath going in and out of the body makes you aware of much more mindful, so that you arouse alertness, and you are aware too, and that leads to a bit of wisdom, because you're aware too of the breath always moving and always changing. And that's one of the lakkhana in Buddhism, this impermanence. We also don't own our breath. It's not self. It is, so it's actually a very good way of learning to enjoy and keep stable with experience, but you don't grab onto it. It's not owned. And the breath is also sometimes a little bit unsatisfactory, and that's fine too. That's what's called dukkha. So that awareness will inevitably bring a sense of those qualities. But more important for this practice is you will feel the attention resting, and you'll feel in time a kind of unification, which leads then to the jhana, which the Buddha described. So does that sort of answer your question? What we're trying to do is two things at the same time, to arouse stillness and mindfulness. And so you're always doing that with the practice. And sometimes you feel still, but you're not very mindful. Sometimes you can become terribly mindful, but you're not very still. But eventually it just comes together, and you do start to feel them working together. And if you ever had any moments where you really felt, oh yes, I'm enjoying the breath, that would be when they've come together.
Thank you, Sarah.
Does that answer the question about? I'll just check. Does that answer the question about? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Roma.
Just to reinstate for everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to either post them in the chat and we will get to them, or just put your hand up, let us know, or maybe post in the chat that you want to say a question, and then we will get to you eventually.
And if they're as practical as anything, like, just my knees hurt, this is a very valid question. Now, I have some, I seem to have lost my chat questions. Oh, there we are. So may I ask what it was called, please? Yes, Guinevere, it's samatha breathing mindfulness. It's called samatha practice, though it has some vipassana in. And if you feel it's a practice you'd like to do, there is a university group, and anybody who would actually like to do this practice in the long term, just get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with the university group. But it's called a Samatha breathing mindfulness. Okay, Guinevere has responded to that. Now, here we have an interesting one. Oh, I think Tian, yes, you had a question. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Hand. Yeah.
I have actually two. I don't know if it's a bit too much, but I was wondering if you can describe the feeling of piti, because I've done meditation and I don't know if and when piti arises.
Yeah,
or that's
a brilliant question, because piti is one of the characteristics of awakening and the Buddhist path. It's a bojjhanga, an enlightenment factor, and it's very important. And it's sometimes difficult to know when it's there. Now, my teacher, L.S. Cousins, said, if you felt a lot of energy or heat in the practice, that is the beginning of piti. And sometimes for some people, it actually is just joy. It's often translated as joy, or usually. And that is how it can really surprise people, by just overwhelming joy. And there is no other word for it. But if you keep that awareness of the breath, you won't get alarmed or frightened by it. It'll just be something that's there that you can keep steady with the joy. The reason I say this is, for some people, it can become very intense and they can actually have shaking, or the body can move, or tears can flow. And you're very lucky if you get any of those phenomena, which you wouldn't now unless you've done quite a bit of meditation before. But if you do, you're very lucky, because it is actually piti, which is one of the factors that can be aroused in this meditation. It's always balanced in the meditation by something called sukha, which is contentment or happiness. So that when the joy becomes very strong, you find it then goes to, if you're aware of the breath, it goes to something more tranquil, which is called sukha. But it can be detected in all sorts of ways. Like, some people just get heat. Some people get a little, just like they can feel one hair going on end or something like that. There's very varied manifestations. So it's a very good question. And a lot of people just kind of feel energetic, which is also another manifestation. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. I have
the other one. Yeah.
A little bit other question is, so in Mahayana, I'm sure you're aware, there's this kind of practice called Dongren, which is the taking and giving upon the breath.
Mm-hmm.
When you take in dukkha and you put out kind of sukha, compassion.
Yeah.
In the early Buddhist perspective, what would you make of that?
No, I was having just this conversation with the contemplative studies people in Brown University. This is our Zoom age. They were talking about just the same thing this afternoon. And there is a practice which is very different, and I think probably dates to Shanti Deva or somebody who talks about practice in that way. This is actually the way we do it, is actually the traditional Southern Buddhist way. And I think all practices have their own ecosystems. I'm sure the Tibetan one works in the Tibetan system, and this one works in this one. I've always found this one very useful, because it's one that allows you to have loving kindness to yourself first and then send it out. And so for me, this is the one that resonates. But it's, each system has its own way of doing it. This is the other reason I like this one, is that you can do it during the day when you're just walking in town or something. You can still be breathing in love and kindness for yourself and breathing it out to other beings. I wouldn't want to breathe in the dukkha of other beings in the middle of Oxford, but maybe I'm not compassionate enough. But for me to be compassionate, I need to have the compassion for myself first. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. I also have another little question there, but Samuel, yes, also put up your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I also have two questions. So quickly following on the last one, when you say breathe in loving kindness, are we supposed to take that kind of metaphorically, or are we supposed to think of this as we are literally breathing in something which is loving kindness?
This is the essence of this Boran Kamantan, the old meditation. It assumes something is there, so you find it. And it is actually a very characteristic quality of this meditation, that you allow the wish to develop and you hope you'll find it. Now, Hinayana school would say that that loving kindness is there in your mind all the time anyway, but it is obscured. And it wouldn't be put quite like that way in this meditation, but it's something like that it's in the universe there somewhere. So if you ask it to come, it will come. And if you breathe it out, you will breathe it out. And it's that balance between evocation and invocation. You sort of just assume it's there. Now, interestingly, I thought this was just a Buddhist, just for Buddhist sort of esoteric schools or for really serious practitioners, but I read some research by the Mindfulness Center, and they'd been saying to people, just do 2 minutes a day where you say to yourself, may I be well and happy, may I be well and happy. And these are people who were in remission from severe depression, but would be liable to go back to it. And it had a quite extraordinary effect, even though, as you say, you can do it and you think, well, I'm not feeling very much loving kindness. I don't feel any, that you can do it. And actually it does apparently alleviate depression in people to a rather odd degree, as if you're sending a message to your subconscious. I think that's how we'd interpret it in the West. That it's almost like you're sending a message to your subconscious to be well and happy, and it will oblige. Eventually. Yeah.
Yeah, so my second question had to do with, I guess, the reliability of insight under meditation. So I guess there are different meditation traditions in Buddhism and in Hinduism, and some of these have really kind of substantive philosophical content. So for example, if you follow this particular kind, then you might end up believing that you have no self. If you follow this other kind, you might end up believing that everyone shares the same self of Brahman. So I'm wondering about how we should think of meditation, because there's a worry that what if this leads us to a particular substantive philosophical view without kind of proper argumentation for it?
Well, from the Buddhist point of view, a view is a view, and even with really good argumentation, it's a view. So in the Brahmajala Sutta, the Buddha goes through all the 62 kinds of possible views and says, if they are view, then they are view. And right view does not involve a substantive or a non-substantive, or both or neither, or any of the permutations. That's the sort of intellectual answer, if you like. But from a practical point of view, if you're doing a practice, I think it's actually a really interesting question you're asking, because you're asking about the reliability of your own evidence in a way. And I think it is very interesting. And I think that's why the formula for Buddhism is always come and see, ehipassiko. Try it out for yourself and don't believe anything. And actually, if you do the practice on those terms, you won't come to a view of any kind. And in fact, that's why a lot of Christians are very cheerfully practicing this practice, for instance. And there has been such a fruitful interchange between Christian contemplative traditions and Hindu and Buddhist, because when you do a meditation, you're not quite in the realm of views in the same way. Now, you might be an academic afterwards and go to the realm of all kinds of views. That's fine, and the Buddha does not criticize that. But it's if you attach to them. Right view is right seeing. So if you're on a walk and you can't see, or something's getting into your vision, which any view does, then it's an obstruction. When you're doing your meditation, you're doing your meditation. Now, there are safeguards, and the Buddha warns against people thinking that a particular meditation state, which may be so refined and subtle, it's wonderful. People think they've seen the ultimate truth.
And that actually the Buddha does address too in the Potapada Sutta, a very subtle sutta. He says, trust every experience that feels subtle and true, but do not regard it as permanent or form views about it. No, I think you've asked a really interesting question. And the Buddha clearly had problems with people who did form all sorts of views.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much.
Does that help? Is that a helpful answer?
Yeah, it does. It does help. I'll have to look up those suttas you mentioned. Yeah.
Yes, it's the Potapada, and it's number 9 in the Digha Nikaya, and the Brahmajala is number 1. And
Okay,
it's
yeah.
full of views, number 1. And number 9 is full of states which are very good, but they're impermanent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Val, yeah.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to follow up from that. I really like this idea of you're taken somewhere, you don't know where that's taking you. You know, it might be the complete denial of the self, or it might be the kind of an extreme assertion of the self, and that you're taken there without argument. I find that really refreshing way of looking at it, because I think, especially when I think about, certain difficulties that I have with kind of problems in philosophy and things like that, I often find that I don't know the answer. These are really difficult questions, but I somehow feel pulled in one direction or another. Sometimes they're opposing directions, but I nonetheless feel that pull. And often I can't get there without argument. So I think that this is really refreshing way to get somewhere.
Yes, and I think it's this thing about belief, because that's why Samuel's question was so good and interesting, that actually we do obtain things from meditation. It's not actually taking you anywhere that won't be truthful for you. It is your own breath, and you're not being asked to impose a view on it. It may be afterwards that you formulate or articulate what has happened in a certain way, and that may be different in different contexts, and clearly different Buddhisms have arisen precisely because of that reason. But these are both very, very interesting questions. But there is also a sense you have to trust your probing inquiry as well and enjoy it. If it is the middle way, it will feel the middle way. I think that's very important to remember. All the Buddhist philosophies stress this thing about being in the middle. Quite literally, you're in the middle. You don't get pulled or taken anywhere you don't want to go. And I think Sam's formulation of that was very useful and interesting, really. Because we don't want to kind of get caught up in some weird idea. We don't want that. We want to examine how things are.
You just mentioned that this idea of not becoming attached to meditation itself, even if you find a practice to be really beneficial, that you shouldn't become attached to the practice because they're impermanent.
No, I wouldn't say no. I think it's very good for us to become attached to practice. It's good. Chanda is a skillful Chitasaka in the Abhidhamma. So no, what I meant is that we don't have to take a state that we experience in meditation as a permanent truthfulness about the universe. Yeah, it may be true and it may be subtle, but it may not be the full Buddhist path. So, attachment to meditation, by and large, is all good. Chanda is one of the skillful Chitasakas. So if you enjoy it and like it, that's all fine.
it negates my question.
Oh.
But there is another one in the chat, which I think we might have missed.
Yes, there is another question here. Shall I go on to that one? Yeah.
Different Buddhist schools have different views on the duration of moments. How, if at all, does the counting in this meditation relate to a particular view or tradition? Or is this counting totally unrelated to this?
That's a lovely question. I think it would be truthful to say I don't think there is any relationship at all. What Buddha-Gosa says about a slightly different system of counting is that it's like you're trying to keep cows in a field. So by counting them, you can watch them go into the field and you can watch them go out. It's just a way of keeping the mind on an even keel. It's a lovely question, but I think it is just a practical thing that it stops. If you're doing a very simple counting, you can't actually be doing anything else. So it allows your mind to settle down. And did you have another one, Roma?
I was wondering actually about something you mentioned earlier to do with the change in the style of meditation practice in Thailand. Because you mentioned that one of the reasons for this might be because of a changing kind of emphasis on kind of things being scientific. Or and I was wondering what you thought about that, because I've noticed that in lots of Western kind of conceptualizations of Buddhism is of a very kind of rational and scientific kind of thought edifice. So I was wondering what you thought about, I don't know, the kind of parallels.
No, I think I find this wonderfully interesting. Basically, the Siam didn't get colonized. They didn't get colonized, and they were very clever, really, in a way. And there was a king, King Chulalongkorn, who wanted to make sure that Siam, Thailand, appeared really as an equal to the West. So that there was quite a deliberate intent to promote Buddhism as being a really important tradition that had great psychological accuracy, and things like the Metta being moving and changing all the time. This, of course, is a very ancient Buddhist idea. And so with a number of other factors, a new school of meditation arose in Burma in the 19th century called Vipassana, which actually underplayed the jhanas and stressed the importance of this cognitive side. It had always been in Buddhism and is always there, and it's a very important part, but it was just one element which then got emphasized a great deal as a lot of Anglophone works were published about this practice, and it became very popular in the States and absolutely helped so many people, and it formed the basis of the mindfulness movement. And so it has been wonderful. So I'm, but what it does tend to do is to articulate things in a way which have a strong appeal to the cognitive. And while the original works didn't sort of appeal too much to the rational in the sense of not looking at the emotional, it certainly became that in the States, as here is your secular scientific Buddhism. And so, but this is what happens to Buddhist traditions. They do change quite a bit. But I think a lot of people need and like the traditional path, which is the balance of the two. And you actually, when I said it had died out in Thailand, actually it is coming back in again. I think people have realized that, and it's much, much more popular now. But they went through a phase of being sort of very, it has to be Vipassana. And you do actually get some Vipassana schools who say that. They say, don't do any other of the old practices, do the new, this one. But I'm always suspicious of people who say you shouldn't do any other practices. Because the Buddha actually encouraged lots of practices. It was what suited the person was the most important thing. So that seems to me the Buddhist way. Okay.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up on what
Yes.
you just said. How do you know what suits you?
Well, that's why it is important in Buddhist traditions to consult and to learn from what is called the good friend. It's not like I think the northern traditions tend to talk a lot about the guru or the teacher in East Asian traditions. I'd say the more, in this particular tradition of practice, you talk about the good friend. You go and consult with somebody about your practice, and it'll be an experienced teacher who will be able to see what suits you. I mean, breathing mindfulness is said to suit most temperaments, but there are emphases that you may need to make for your temperament if you do it in the long run. And actually a lot of people, I'd say most people have something that they need to tinker with or change it. And you only get through discussions or what we call reports in the tradition with a guide who will, you know, I mean, it just take a few minutes sometimes, oh, try this or try that. But you do need to do it because the very fact of talking about the practice and then having somebody listening and saying, try this, it makes it all much more, gives it all much more presence and takes it seriously. I mean, the breath is a serious thing, you know, it keeps us alive. So we want to look after it properly. And a guide will help you do that.
For spiritual guide, is that the Kalyana
Yes,
Mitra?
yes,
Okay.
good. Yeah. Kalyana Mitra or Kalyana Mitta, yeah. And it just means a good friend. So I when I learned meditation, I used to go and see Lance, and I used to find him quite fearsome. I was very nervous about it, but I knew he would always give me real help with my practice. Hugo, the person who takes the class in Oxford, is not at all like that. I'd go and chat to him anytime. So I do recommend him if you want to do this practice. And you just have a chat for a couple of minutes afterwards, and it is, if you've been teaching for a few years, you do actually see sort of imbalances that can be addressed, and how somebody can arouse a certain faculty more or relax more in the practice. That's usually actually people try too hard. And you do actually get an eye for that after a while. Quite simple things, but they can mean a lot. A lot of people really do put in too much effort, and they just need one chat every couple of weeks to just realize that and take a slightly different effort.
To me, the idea of putting in too much effort, you know, like too much effort to practice.
It's the most common problem.
How does that manifest in someone's meditation if they're putting in too much to it?
You can always tell it when somebody comes in saying, I'm just not trying hard enough. I'm not trying hard enough. There is actually, you do just know. And when they start talking about it, you can tell. Most of us fall away from the middle way a lot of the time with our meditation. Most of us do a little bit too much effort, a little bit too little, and then we find the middle. And it is usually obvious when we're trying too hard to another person. That's why I still talk to one of my friends, you know, I will talk to another teacher in my tradition about my practice, because as soon as you start talking about it, the other person will be like a mirror. They'll be able to see that if the effort is too much. It usually is when people start. It's like those things that people do very well, which they do with relaxed effort. You think, oh, it looks so simple, and you try and do it and you do it all wrong and too much. That is what it's like in, I'm going to yoga with my daughter, and she's really good, but I'm hopeless. So I just get everything wrong all the time. And it's obvious to anybody that I just need to relax the effort or the things I need to do. It's a little bit like that.
Sorry, just another follow-up on this as well. I really like this idea of kind of a practice good friend. I think that's really interesting. And I was just wondering how that works really in practice. That, I mean, surely it requires also a certain level of trust into this person, that they know what they're talking about, that they know you, and that you kind of recognize each other in some ways. So yeah, how do you form that relationship with somebody?
These are very, very interesting questions. And what we do in our tradition, we have lots of teachers. Usually we do trust chance and people's karma, that if you turn up in a class, it is likely that you will like the teacher and it'll work. But sometimes it doesn't, or, you know, sometimes it doesn't work and they go on. But oddly enough, usually it does. The way it works in my tradition is quite unusual in the West, though very, very traditional in rural Thailand, for instance. I went to class, and after the class, I'd just chat for a couple of minutes with Lance, who was my teacher. And just over over a period of time, you do build up trust. And I think, you know, if you feel you can trust that person, and you have to trust your own instincts as well. You know, if you feel that's there, then think, well, maybe that is right for me. I got to know Lance actually very well, you know, as a friend anyway, because he, you know, I lived near him, and then he came to Oxford when we moved here, and I knew him for 40 years before he died. Yeah, and it's a different kind of friendship, but it is there. And in our tradition, what we also do is that we discuss, once you start teaching, you can discuss with other teachers your practice, so that also builds up trust. And again, you'd only do it with somebody you felt you wanted to. You know, I think wish is important there. But I don't think a practice like this can flourish without that sort of human contact. I think it's been particularly hard during the pandemic to find meditation communities that can support and instruct in practice, as you mentioned, is important. You've mentioned the group at Oxford. Do you have any other advice? Well, the only thing I can say is to look up the website for the tradition I'm in. We have a group in Oxford that Hugo takes, and that's very nice. I think people like him. But if you go to our website, you'll see we decided at the beginning of the pandemic to offer meditation teaching to anybody who wanted it. So there is a contact person to get in touch with. And we're doing a kind of juggling. Some people want online, and we can't always offer, if you live in Leicester, there might not be a group there, or Dartmouth or something, but we can offer online teaching now to anybody. So, and if you're in Oxford, you are near groups anyway. So if you prefer to learn online, that's also fine. It's called samatha.org. I'll write it in. There we are. That's our website. And if you want to find out about ours is the Oxford Buddhist Society, we do a class there. And that's very popular.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming in, guiding this meditation and discussing it. It's been so interesting. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I also want to thank everyone for coming, spending your evening with us on the 1st of November, which has come around incredibly quickly. And thank you to Val and to Alice, thanking everyone at OPP for organising such a wonderful course of seminars. And if you have enjoyed it, then next Monday at the same time, there will be another seminar called Nonviolence, Afrofuturism and Hip Hop by Greg and Warwick Moses, which I think looks really good. But yeah, just before we close, if anyone has any last points, anything they'd want to say, then feel free to let us know. But if not, thank you for a really wonderful few hours.
Well, and thank you for inviting me, Val, and for introducing it, Roman. I've really enjoyed the excellent questions, and I hope you find something that suits you all, a path with heart.